it's much easier for you because you go to school and the teachers reinforce those values. You might go to a place of worship. They reinforce those values. Well, those are the same values that are expected in almost every job environment you ever go into. So it's a seamless transition because they want you to be on time. They want you to value a work ethic. They want you to do all those kind of things. So that fits very nicely. However, in poverty, the rules are vastly different. Each class system has its own set of rules. The problem is if you grow up in poverty, especially in generational poverty, you know the rules of poverty. But there's no jobs that go by those rules. And so one of the nonprofits that I started was, I said, you know what, I'm going to take people in poverty just as they are. And if I could help them navigate some of the barriers, the legal barriers, getting their license, getting their tickets taken care of, all that kind of stuff, while also teaching them very relationally what's going to be expected, but not just telling them, hey, you have to be at work on time, but helping them understand why that even matters.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle podcast. I am sitting across the table from another amazing leader today who completely exemplifies that amazing intersection between heart and hustle. I'm sitting down with Michael Coleman, the CEO of the Heart of Alabama Food Bank. Michael, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, really excited about being here today.
You know, today's going to be an amazing conversation. But before we kind of dive into that, who is the man who sits across from me? How would his friends describe him? Work unrelated.
Well, it all depends on which friends you talk about. If you talk about friends from high school, they would say somebody who's headed nowhere fast. And that would be very true. But really, because out of desperation, I went into the military when I was 18 years old. I really didn't have any other path. I didn't take school very seriously. I won't go into a lot of detail, but, you know, I was kind of, my parents divorced when I was young, kind of went from home to home, had that instability, was taking care of myself a lot. So developed a lot of independence, but didn't have the maturity to match that. So it caused me then to, when I came up under my teachers, to rebel against that authority because I was used to kind of making it 13 and 14 my own decisions. But went to the military and was humbled very quickly in a real way. But it was very good for me to begin to understand a bigger picture in life and understand that I'm not at the center of the universe. And it was just a little bit of adjustment to my world perspective. And along that journey, you know, I got very serious about my faith. I got very serious about making something of my life or doing something that mattered to other people, that made a difference. Didn't know what that looked like, but was just trying to unpack that every day and live that out. And so it's led me down the path that here at 58 years old, that I'm still going down, trying to sometimes figure things out. But yeah, most of the people that I knew growing up, they've forgotten about that old Michael, and I appreciate that. I'm always grateful for the second chance. But yeah, I was not a model citizen or anybody that they would want to model their life in how I was. So yeah, I'll just kind of leave it there.
You know, one of the best things about, you know, hopping on the podcast and having discussions like this is we can talk a little bit about the benefit of perspective and distance, right? If you had to go back 47 years and give that 18-year-old who was just hopping into the military a piece of advice on how he was going to navigate the next 10, 15 years, what would you tell him?
Wow, that is such a great question. There's a country song. Well, when I say a country song, it's really kind of a little bit of a faith-based song, but has a little country feel to it. But it talks about if I could go back in time, what would I say to me. And it's called Dear Younger Me. It's by a group called Mercy Me. And Dear Younger Me. And the question is, it's a fascinating question because it says, would I go back and tell you to do things differently? Because going through the things that I've been through was what I needed to change my perspective. So I know that we want to go back and go, yeah, I want to avoid those tough times, but it was the tough times that really slapped me upside the head and helped me have a more sober approach to my future and really see a much healthier perspective than I would. So, I mean, that's kind of what the song's about. Would I go back and change things? I don't know that I would. And the truth of the matter is, looking back at my life at 17 and 18, I had several people speaking into my life. I just wasn't open to it. I just wasn't to that place that I was open to it. And since then, I have dealt with several people who kind of hit that I recognized at the time. Look, it's not what I'm trying to share with them. It's that they're just not in a place where they've hit bottom and they're open to those words. They don't mean anything. And so, yeah. So, I don't know that I would have tried to encourage them to have a more mature perspective, but knowing me back when I was 17 and 18, I was too hard-headed to hear it.
I've been going through this exercise with guests on the podcast, and I've been trying to come at this from thinking about myself in like an 85-year-old frame, right? 85 years old. If you could go back to Keenan, who's now 33 this Friday, as the time of recording this, I'll be turning 34. What would you say to that man? And I would tell him to enjoy the process more. I think often we are in such a rush to get from here to there that we don't take the time to slow down and truly enjoy what we do every single day. Now, there's hardships, there's growth, there's growing pains, but a lot of that comes in how we kind of frame that in our mind to be able to enjoy those times of uncomfortableness, right? And that's kind of how I've been thinking about life a little bit more, is I want to be the guy who's remembered for enjoying the ride as he kind of goes down this path.
That's a real interesting perspective to me. My daughters are grown. They're both married. They both have 2 children. And they remind me of how difficult, how hard of a parent. They knew I always loved them. I was always there for them. But they kind of relay to me that I was a little bit of a drill sergeant. And I wish that I could go back and see what I have now. My wife and I got married right out of high school. I didn't have the maturity to be a father. We didn't have the money. Everything was tight. We were watching everything. And I'm trying to make a military career just to be able to provide for my family moving forward. And yeah, so I'm the first to admit to my children, hey, there were times I disciplined out of frustration and anger rather than always doing what was in your best interest. And, I was not always consistent, all the things that we are. And I told them, it's going to surprise you when your children get grown, they're going to begin to talk about things that you did. And it's going to surprise you about where you failed your parent. Where you failed your children, or at least from their perspective. But, they tease me about it a lot. I'm glad we're all, in very close fellowship with one another. But I think that's a lot. I think that's good advice about enjoying the ride. I wish I could go back and say, at least from a parenting perspective, not everything is worth going to the mat over. There's some things, some little comment, some little eye roll that I could have just let go, and just had a little bit of a softer tone at times, rather than always trying to feel like, no, I'm having to shape this person for the future. I'm not going to let any of that slide, and probably stay on them as much as I did. So yeah, I would like, from that perspective, as a parent, I would like to go back and fix some of that.
Well, what we're talking about is a very human experience, though. You being an 18-year-old trying to build a military career, money is tight, new wife, building a family. You didn't exactly have the space, right, to create some of those amorphous, just like happy, feel good moments. You know what I mean? Like, you were really kind of concentrated on insulating the family from the stresses of the world. And sometimes that meant being a little bit strict, right?
Yeah, and I try to help. So I grew up in a very tumultuous environment with my own father, and we had reconciled before I died. But if you look back, the trauma that happens generationally, he would talk about the trauma that he had, and he had a very unique situation. But instead of learning from that, he passed a lot of those same things on to me, and I find myself battling those same things. And so, every generation says, "Hey, I want to be the one to kind of see it more clearly." Um, but as my own children understand, we all have frailties, we all have weaknesses. We are all, trying to do the right thing, and in spite of our best efforts, our own, we're just going to fall short way more than we would like to admit to. Um, so it's very important for me, and that kind of parlays into some of the other things we're talking about. It kind of parlays into this world of, man, I want to extend grace to people. I want to extend mercy to people. I want to extend forgiveness to people, because that's what I need in my life. And if I want that for my own life, I need to be leading with that mindset of people who even intentionally do things wrong against me, or who are unkind, or those kind of things, because you truly don't know what somebody's background has been and what their perspectives are and how they're coming at situations in life. And so I have found the more that I can love people and extend mercy and forgiveness, give them the benefit of the doubt, the better it works for me and how people regard me.
I was truly inspired after the last time that we talked together, because you had mentioned a really interesting concept, which was when you come from a certain, I'm just going to call this like sect of society, you're a middle class individual. Often we grow up with these values that are instilled into how we see the world. And sometimes when we are helping the community in a nonprofit sector, like the food bank as an example, we're trying to speak those values onto people who can't even relate with our life experience. Let's talk a little bit about that, because that was super impactful for me last time.
So I don't even remember if I told you this, but the very first nonprofit I stepped in, so I did 21 years in the Army. I stepped out of that. When I stepped into the nonprofit space, I had several friends who owned businesses and even knew some CEOs at what you would call corporate level. And they were all talking about the same kind of thing. Look, we're desperate for employees, for good employees. And yet I was working in a nonprofit. We were doing benevolence and handing out groceries and those kind of things. And so often people would come by and I'm like, hey, you want to pray about anything? Is there anything I can, sit down and talk with you about? And it seemed like half of them were saying, yeah, I need I'm desperate for a job. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, I've got people who are desperate to work, desperate in need of a job, and I've got people who are over corporations who are desperate for good employees. And I thought initially, in my ignorance, I thought, oh, it's a perfect fit. Why not I just serve people by connecting them with the employees? And I was a little bit naive, because as I began to do that, it never was working out. And I couldn't figure out, what's the disconnect? If I can figure out the disconnect, then I really can help elevate people out of poverty. And so I was finally turned on to this book called A Framework for Understanding Poverty by Dr. Ruby Payne. And she's written books like Bridges Out of Poverty and things like that. But the most valuable thing in that book was a research done to where she said, we all know that there are individual challenges among race and other things in the workplace, but she said the greatest challenge is really it's a class problem. And at first I thought, well, let me see what she says. And so she talked about that every society, and she breaks it down into three groups: poverty class, middle class, and wealth class. And she looks at 15 areas and analyzes it through that lens. And she said, so and I got to hear her in person speak as well. And she said, when you're raised up in the middle class, and you're taught those values, like how to respond to adults, how to talk to people, how to look them in the eye, how to shake hands, just all those kind of middle class values. It's much easier for you because you go to school and the teachers reinforce those values. You might go to a place of worship. They reinforce those values. Well, those are the same values that are expected in almost every job environment you ever go into. So it's a seamless transition because they want you to be on time. They want you to value a work ethic. They want you to do all those kind of things. So that fits very nicely. However, in poverty, the rules are vastly different. Each class system has its own set of rules. The problem is if you grow up in poverty, especially in generational poverty, you know the rules of poverty, but there's no jobs that go by those rules. And so one of the nonprofits that I started was, I said, you know what, I'm going to take people in poverty just as they are. And if I could help them navigate some of the barriers, the legal barriers, getting their license, getting their tickets taken care of, all that kind of stuff, while also teaching them very relationally what's going to be expected, but not just telling them, hey, you have to be at work on time, but helping them understand why that even matters. So I'll give you one quick example. So Hyundai Motor Manufacturing, Hyundai's U.S. plants here in Montgomery, Alabama. And so when I toured there, they said, look, if we have all these tier one plants, and if a tier one plant does, and I'll just use the exhaust systems. So if the exhaust systems are not there when the cars are being built and they have to stop production, that company responsible for the exhaust systems gets fined $10,000 per minute that they have to shut production down. And so I was like, okay, so let's say you're on a part that's putting on the doors and there's 4 of you and you don't show up for work, you're going to affect your team because what I was being told was, well, what difference does it make when I show up? You're not going to pay me till I show up. But they had no concept of what it is to be a part of a team, making sure that, you know, you're working with higher echelon and you're building this car and everybody's depending on you. And I think I shared with you something that I think, and I'll do this just very quickly if you want me to, is to kind of illustrate this was the issue about time. In the middle class, everything's about the future. I might decide I'm going to go to college today, not because I'm going to make more money today, but I know that to get to accomplish my career aspirations, I'm going to need a bachelor's degree, let's say. Or I might need, if I want to be an electrician, I've got to go get my certification in electrician. But in poverty, they are not taught how to think into the future. They are taught because everything is in the present, because you're just putting out one fire after another. That's what surviving in the moment is like. And this really dawned on me. I don't even know remember if it's in the book or it just came to me. If you can't think into the future, then you don't have the ability to understand consequences of your choices. One of the shows I used to watch all the time was The First 48 on A&E. I don't know if you ever saw it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, they'd come to Mobile. They'd come to Birmingham. I mean, we had that show all over Alabama. But I looked at it from, here's people primarily in poverty. And you would see guys that would have the absolute most bravado in the world. And they get pulled in. And at some point they go, look, we've got you on video. We've got 3 witnesses. You're 19 years old. You're going to jail for the rest of your life. And that was the time that the consequences, they shot somebody, a pizza guy for, $20. And now the consequences don't hit them until they are caught and their future is sacrificed. And you see 19-year-old kids start bawling and asking for my mom. Can I have my mom? Because they revert to this childlike figure because the consequences don't hit them because they're not taught to think into the future. I mean, so often we make decisions every day. Hey, I'm not going to eat this extra piece of dessert, which I love to do. Thankfully, I'm an old fat man now, so I don't have to worry about as much as I used to. But when I was in the military, it wasn't like that. I had to really watch what I ate. And I'm like, man, if I eat this extra piece of dessert, I've got to go do some extra PT. And so we all make decisions in the moment, but it's based off future consequences of that decision. In poverty, that just doesn't exist. And I don't know if I share this, one more I'll share with you, is the fact about money. Money is something to be used and enjoyed. That's a middle class value. And I learned that from my mother would sit down. This is back in the day when there were checkbooks and no banking online. I would see her with a stack of bills and she would be writing checks for all the bills. And if there was money left over, she got paid every 2 weeks. If there was money left over, she'd say, well, maybe we'll get to go out to eat. But if there wasn't, we'd be sucking on green beans because the priority was you pay your bills because that's your name. And that was, again, just a standard middle class value. But if you think about somebody whose mortgage is due or their rent is due the following Tuesday and they get paid on a Friday, they got a pocket full of cash and they're not thinking into the future. They're saying, hey, I'm going to go to the club. I'm going to enjoy myself. And if I blow it all, then guess what? I'll worry about paying the mortgage next week. Right. So it's not even thinking into the future. It's just we do. And so often in poverty, people who are in that cycle continue to stay in that cycle, even if they have a job connection, because of the thinking that's I would just say maladaptive and really hurts them from being able to go forward in life.
So how do we break that cycle?
Well, I started a program because, and I even told people in Montgomery, Alabama, this was years ago, 2012, I actually cashed in, my wife and I cashed in our RA and, took the huge penalty because everybody said, yeah, we need to help people in poverty, but there wasn't a lot of money to be thrown at an idea. So, we did it. I invested all the money I had. And the idea was, look, I'm not the grand wizard. I can't, wave a magic wand and poof, your life is going to be fixed. But what I will do is step into this space with you. And what I used to tell our students, and the racial breakdown was about 85% African-American, about 15% white. I said, but what I'll do is I'll come alongside of you and I will make sure, as long as you have a desire to move forward in life and to be something different, I know you don't know how to get there, and that's okay. But if you just bring the want to every day, I'll walk beside you. And when we get to a barrier that you don't have the ability on your own to overcome, either because you don't know how or you don't have the resources, my oath to you is I'm going to provide that to you so that you can continue to move forward. Now, and so that's what it was like. And I had all sorts of people go, hey, I love your program, but man, I want to change a whole neighborhood. And I said, you're not going to, these people are people who have had 18 to 25 years of that systematic programming of poverty rules. And only when you get into this ever deepening relationship and show authenticity and you show love and you show care to people, you show them a different, even with me doing that, the majority still quit along the way or they wouldn't go forward. But those who did have gone on to do some pretty remarkable things and have been able to lift themselves out of poverty. We want the easy way in society. I've had politicians, how can we transform whole neighborhoods? And I said, that's a pipe dream, because when you go, especially here I'm a white guy, middle-aged white guy, going to an African-American community, the first thing they tell me is, I don't trust you. And I'm like, I get it. I get it. I've got to prove to you through our life that I'm not going to forsake you when it gets hard. As long as you bring, and I tell them all the time, that's one thing I can't give you is the want to. But if you bring that want to, I can deal with the rest of the stuff to help you. And I formed it changed me inside and out. I mean, people say that may even sound like just everybody says it, but I'm telling you, it really helped me to see how many barriers there are in poverty that people have to overcome. And it's such a shame in the middle class. I mean, I spent half my time trying to educate the middle class because we look at people in poverty and say, oh, come on, just do things the way I did. We don't see it from their perspective. And their perspective is there's a lot of potholes. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of people who have promised them things that didn't work out. So there's a lot of mistrust. There's tons of barriers. You don't just step out of poverty into a middle-class environment. First and foremost, you have to know how to navigate that world, not just what the rules are, but why those rules exist. Why is it important to be on time? Why is it important to be respectful? Why is it important to save money? Why? I mean, because you can tell them to do those things, but they don't know the why because it's not something they were taught oftentimes in poverty.
You gave a beautiful analogy last time of standing across, let's just call it the sidewalk from another person and say, come on over here. Like, we can help you out. But then looking at it from their view, they see the traps, the pitfalls, the challenges, the invisible barriers that we don't perceive. And I thought that was incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and I've seen it time and time again. I'm trying to share with you a different example. I have so many that pop in my head. I had this guy, he was well-meaning. He was upper middle class, and he's like, yeah, I talked to this lady, and she was going to go buy these rims, and her tires, had the little tiny, I'm talking about the big, super big tires, and she was having to replace them every 15,000 miles, just not enough tread on them. And he said, I told her I don't replace my tires till every 60,000. And she's like, really? And he's like, yeah, Well, she went out and she still went out and got the same tires. And he wants to throw his hands up. And I'm like, so let me ask you a question. You don't have any relationship with somebody. You threw out some so-called wisdom and they didn't follow you. And you're ready to throw your hands up and give up on them because they just didn't fall down at your feet and it just doesn't work like that. But that's what people do. They're like, well, I told them what to do, and without any understanding of what that means in poverty. I mean, why there is so many people. I'll be the first to say there's so many people who stay in poverty because they're always trying to project as if they have money. And so they'll put a lot of money. I mean, I used to tell our class, I don't understand why you have a $500 car and $5,000 rims. I mean, it makes no sense to me. If you took those wheels off the car, you'd be lucky to get $500 for that car. But so from my perspective and a middle class perspective, there was all sorts of judgment. And what I recognized was, wait a minute, I'm not connecting with these people because I'm too busy judging and saying this is not right. So what I did was I said, look, if I want to change people's lives, I have to humble myself and say, wait a minute, let me go put myself next to them and see what they're seeing. And that's when our program really came alive. It's when I recognized, you know what? I don't see any barriers when I'm standing at the middle class side looking towards the poverty person. But when I go stand beside them and then they start saying, okay, where do we go from here? I've got all these barriers to get over here to that other side. Boy, it's insurmountable to some people. Now, in reality, it's not always insurmountable. It's usually not. But to them and what they understand and what they know and their point of reference for life up to that point, it seems insurmountable. And so even when somebody like myself who has the best of intentions comes along and says, hey, I really want to help you. I really care about you. And they're like, instant mistrust. What's in it for you? Because in poverty, even sometimes I've had students tell me this, sometimes the person who comes at them the most may be their most beloved loved one. It could be a parent. It could be a sibling that doesn't do anything for them without a financial incentive or some type of motive. Right? They've not experienced just authentic, I'm doing this for you because I care about you. And I'm not even thinking about how you repay me. I'm not even thinking about, I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do and I care about you. So that's a new world to them oftentimes. And we sometimes just make these assumptions that why don't they embrace that? And it's because they've been taken advantage of and they've been hurt, and it's tough for them to navigate.
Nonprofit CEO burnout is a huge challenge. You know, when we're fighting these macroeconomic, societal, and cultural issues where we have to be the belief breaker of systems that have been ingrained and systematically placed into our communities, how do you continue to stay chipper and hopeful and appreciative for the process and the progress that you guys are making?
I believe, let me say this. I was very discouraged when I had poured everything I had into some of my students, and then they just walked away as if I'm a nobody to them. And so a couple of things had to happen. I had to change. Again, this is about me growing as a person and changing my perspective to say, look, I've stepped into this realm of trying to help people who oftentimes are very, very broken and have all the reason in the world to mistrust me. And at times it's going to feel like it's too hard for them and they're going to walk away. And it feels like that you're just getting that finger and saying thanks, but no thanks. I don't want your relationship. I don't want that. And that's really not what they're projecting. You know, there's other things behind that. It's just maybe a fear they couldn't overcome. Let me just give you another quick example. We found out we would give people bus passes. And what we found out, though, was one of the things in poverty is you typically do not ask questions in poverty. And the reason you don't ask questions is because you risk looking stupid. Now, to look stupid means you open up yourself to ridicule, and then you can be pushed outside of your collective group. Now, when you say that, you're like, yeah, I totally get that. But from a middle class perspective, middle class values are like, if I go to New York, I've never ridden the subway. I go down to the subway. First thing I'm looking for is the ticket desk, the help counter, whatever. I'm seeking out information because a middle class value is you ask for help. We don't see it as a sign of weakness. So we kept having students that were depending on rides, and we kept telling them this is one of the things we're trying to break because rides are never going to be dependable and get you at work every time. But they would not take the bus. And I'm like, we're having to kick students out because they can't get here on time. So did some further research and ended up finding out that we had especially young women. Since they don't ask questions, we go to the bus station and they're trying to figure out which bus to take. And they saw the help window, but they were not going to ask for help. And they couldn't figure it out. And then they started having panic attacks. And when they had panic attacks, then the whole thing kind of fell apart. So we then began to walk down. Anybody that needed the bus, we would go down to the bus station with them. We would take them up to the help desk. We would find out where their address was, what bus they should get on. We got on the bus and we rode their route, especially if they had any changeovers. So because you expose them to that, and now they're equipped with that power, not always, but most of the time, we had helped them overcome that barrier. But a lot of it was just fear. And so we had to get our, so to speak, get our hands dirty, go ride the bus and do those kind of things and illustrate for them how to overcome this on their own. That kind of commitment, though, and that's one of a million examples, but that kind of commitment has to come from somebody who authentically cares and, is in this for the right reasons. I'm in this because even though you don't know me, I care about the fact that you're trapped in poverty and I want to see you, and I'm willing to give of my resources. I'm willing to give of my time. I'm willing to give, fun. That doesn't matter. I just want you to be successful. And even sometimes I've had people who left but contacted me back or gave other people recommendation about coming to the training because they said, hey, this organization's for real. I didn't make it because I chose not to, but you can trust them. You can move. So we were starting to build some real credibility into the community. And that program is still, even though I left after 7 years, because what you talked about, it just sucks the life out of you with that kind of individual care. And as much as you love somebody, you have to find places that fill your own individual tank up. If all I'm doing is emptying my tank for other people and nobody's filling my tank back up, nobody can survive forever on that. I can run on empty for quite a while, but at some point I'm like, I've got to go do something different to be able to take care of my own mental health and my own heart and all those other kind of things. Yeah, so I had to take a break from it. Still stayed in the nonprofit space in Birmingham, but now I'm back here in the food bank in the Montgomery area. And that program, I'm very thankful, is still going very strong.
What fills your cup the most about being at the food bank now?
Yeah, so boy, that's a great question. It's a little bit different in this work than the other group. So the other nonprofits I've been in are direct service. So you get to hear all the stories. We are indirect services in that we cover 35 counties, but we basically source and distribute food to county agencies who then go and take it. So we're living a little bit vicariously through them. Like when we hear stories from agencies, we know it originated with us, and so we're living a little bit. But really it's the perspective of understanding that we have to create a robust network, because that we are the backbone, and that if we need to distribute as much food as timely, as fresh as possible, as timely as possible, and as inexpensively as possible, so that what resources we have will reach the people in need. And it's not so important that we get personal recognition, because we as an organization know, I mean, we pride ourselves, the men and women of this organization come in every day knowing that we are doing what we do for people we will never lay eyes on. But I think about the little child, and I don't think about this from a negative standpoint. Think about, like, Montgomery has its first African-American mayor. We're the very heart of the civil rights movement here. So we have our first African-American mayor in its history. He's actually in his second term here. And I think about the young black child who is 8 years old, who can be anything has the intellect and the ability to be anything he wants to be. But his parents can't provide him enough food, so he doesn't grow physically like he should. He doesn't grow mentally and emotionally. So he's destined for great things for this community, but he's enduring a trauma of food insecurity and not having to go to bed. And so when I think about, hey, we're helping that person, we're helping that child be able to navigate these tough times. And I think about the seniors. My own mother, who was 71 years, when she had to retire, 71 years old, but all she had was Social Security, had no money saved, but worked her whole adult life. But she retired on $1,100 of Social Security. If it were not for me and my sister, she would have really struggled. Well, there's so many people in our area that not only are living on Social Security, but have children, adult children, who are even pulling on some of those resources. So it's a real fight to know that, seniors have trauma of food insecurity, children have it, families have it. And it's just diving into this space and saying, like I did with Hope Inspired Ministries, I don't have all the answers. I don't have it all figured out. I've got my own brokenness that I deal with, but I care enough that I want to step into this darkness, and I want to do what I can and bring what resources to I can. No promises. Like I said, I don't have a magic wand. I'm not looking to have a Jesus complex. I'm not the savior. I just want to step in and bring whatever healing and whatever light and whatever resources I can to dark situations. And, through my faith, I'm obviously a believer in God. I hope God is glorified through that. That's my underlying motive. But because I've been loved, I believe, by God in such a dynamic way, my goal is to love people in an undeserved way, like I've been loved in an undeserved way.
It's such an opportunity to sit across the table from an amazing leader like yourself, Michael, because we hear the passions, we hear the lives that you lift up and you stand up for every single day, and the lives that you're trying to change by implanting good ideas of empowerment and encouragement and vulnerability, and just being willing somebody who's going to show up and lay down for somebody else so they can get a step ahead of you is incredible. I want to know what is the future for the food bank look like over the next 5 years? You're going to continue to do the great work that you're doing. What does the vision look like from your side?
Yeah, we want to, I've always have a heart. Like at one time I was like, I don't want to just get food and give it to give people food. Although, there's some people that are never going to come out of that poverty situation, because we have people who are disabled. We have people who are elderly. There's always going to be people who have challenges and just who need support. And I want to live in a world where we care about our neighbors, but I also want to elevate people who may temporarily need support. I don't want to create a situation to where it creates dependency and it removes their motivation to move forward and utilize their God-given gifts and talents. So we're looking at a couple of different things. Number one, Montgomery is not a wealthy area. We struggle sometimes to do everything we want to do because the funding is just not there. But I really think in the coming years, what we're going to be able to do is create some wraparound services that when somebody comes, it's kind of this idea of lessening the line, and people will just come get food, but we're like, if you have the ability to go to work, man, we want you to experience that. We want the man or the woman to experience that, because there's a lot that goes in their own self-worth and things like that. And so if somebody can take care of themselves, I absolutely want them to be able to take care of themselves and their families, but they just have some barriers oftentimes. So the vision is that, hey, we're here and we have food, and people, I'm telling you, we can go out anywhere, even though we're so rural, we can go out into any place and attract. Food will bring people, 150 to 300 people in any rural part of this state. But I want to go beyond that. I think to truly care about people is not to just keep them in that emergency state where they need food, they get food, they come back. I prefer to kind of be in that developmental where you can meet the emergency needs. You still have to do that. But then let's provide some wraparound services. It may just be that somebody needs some mental health resources or some counseling or something to talk through some of those issues. They might just need some workforce development training or some GED training or introduction into some certain certifications that they need that will launch them. I mean, I've seen people. It's just so heartbreaking. I had this kid, and every week we would have a student of the week, and I remember giving him this, and it said the lady made up. It was just a regular. I think it was a purple piece of paper, and it just said "Student of the Week," and it said, "We love you." And he went into her and said, I'm going to hold on to this. And he was just making a big deal about that. This kid is 21 years old. And finally the instructor said, why is this so important? He goes, I've never had an adult tell me they love me before. And so we jump in and we point a finger at a kid like that and say, why aren't you out doing X, Y, and Z? And there's oftentimes so much. So just encouraging this. I mean, this kid may feel like he's a failure. I'm never going to accomplish anything. Nobody's ever told me good job for anything. And now here's some people that are coming around him and recognizing his potential. So the self-worth that we may have gotten since age 6 when our parents were, encouraging us just to be potty trained, although it didn't take me till age 6 to be potty trained. I just want to go on the record as saying that. But a lot of people don't get that till they're in their early adult stages. And so it might just be those pats on the back, that encouragement. Sometimes somebody needs somebody to speak to them man on man, like in real terms, in a loving way, not talking down to him, not being violent, but just being real with him. There's not a one cure for everybody because everybody's background, everybody's trauma, everybody's starting point is different. So that just hit home with me that I'm like, you know what? Some people need all the services you can get, and some people just need a little boost. If we can get people to where we are with food and then get them introduced to those services and liberate them from poverty, they have self-worth and self-esteem, and they go from being a drag a lifetime drag on government resources, but also lots of those people end up in prison. And so we take somebody who could potentially spend the rest of his life in prison versus somebody who becomes a productive citizen that he's proud of himself, his family can be proud, he can take care of his family, and he can break that generational curse. But it's just, like I said, it's just one person at a time. And boy, do I wish. I tried to look for shortcuts to make it be a bunch of people, but you just got to delve into life with each person. And but there is nothing. When we go to graduation, we may start with 20 people and graduate 5 students. But those 5 students would all give speeches. And I had a guy come in one time and he goes, tell me, he came to the graduation. He looked up on the stage after hearing the people. And he said, I don't even know what you do here. But if that's what you're producing, I'm all in. And I was like, you're like a proud parent when those 5 would graduate. You lost 15 and your heart's hurting for them. But those 5 now have a head start in life and to become something. And boy, you just beaming with pride and you realize 13 weeks of effort and fight and all that, got them to this point. And anyway, there's nothing more rewarding than changing somebody's pathway in life. And even though you don't get near as many as you'd like, boy, it's nothing like it. It puts you on a high, and I highly recommend. It's worth every tear that you shed behind the scenes.
One of the things we do as we close our episode here is we have our previous guest ask you a question. Now, this previous guest is the president and CEO of the Livestrong Foundation. And her question was, if you could go back in time and change one thing, what would it be?
When I go back and look at some of the hardships, even in the nonprofit space, some of the battles that I've had, I tend to be pretty critical on myself because I recognize even though the barriers, in my mind, I'm fighting for the unheard, the voiceless. And I'm talking to people sometimes who are providing barriers. And I recognize sometimes in my passion, I did not exhibit the best character. And I wish I could go back and change that, because as my fate went, so went the fate of those I'm trying to help. And so I thought, I wish I had enough wisdom to know when is it time to fight, like die on this hill, and when is it not. Even though I will tell you this, one of the best advice I ever got when I took over a unit to command a unit in the Army, a guy came up to me and he said, Michael, I want you to imagine you got the old Western gun belts. And I said, yeah. And he goes, you had the bullets in there. He said, yeah, I want you to imagine you got 5 silver bullets. And that silver bullet would take care of any problem. It's going to fix any problem you have. But you're going to be in command about 18 months and you've got 5 of them. So it really taught me about, wait a minute, I can't die on the hill over every issue. I have to think about, when's the time to use the silver bullet. And even though that great advice was given to me out throughout my life, I let my passion sometimes override my wisdom and can end up hurting myself or end up hurting those that I'm trying to help in the meantime. So I wish I would have used wisdom, a little bit more wisdom along the way and less maybe emotion.
When it comes to fighting a fight like you've been fighting in the nonprofit space, often I come back to the analogy that there is no silver bullet, although you might only have 5, but rather there's 100 golden BBs that are going to change these things.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I just want to say, man, you are hands down the definition of heart and hustle, and being able to highlight your story, your perspectives, your philosophies, your unique ways in which we're trying to tackle these huge problems, and your consistency of showing up every day for those people who often don't even know how to raise their hand for themselves is truly inspiring. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, man. Seriously.
Well, Keenan, I'm truly honored to be asked, and I appreciate the opportunity to kind of share my story. And hope other people are encouraged, and if they ever want to reach out to me, they can look us up online and let me know they can find me on LinkedIn as well. But I'd love to help anybody I can out there going through some of those same things.
Yes, sir. Well, that's a wrap.
Thank you for having me.